leadership that we have is bold and positioned enough to confront indiscipline. I mean, going to report internal grievances in the media is just as good as taking the party to court, or is just as good as betraying the party. And so members who are aggrieved by a decision and the spirit of discipline understand that those grievances ought to be channeled through internal processes. I've heard them call for leadership must hear everyone up, leadership must discipline. If I'm supposed to be disciplining anybody, I'll first of all discipline an elected member who will run to the media to run to further degenerate or deepen cracks.
You see, there are a lot of people that have dipped their fingers and nose into constituencies. His Excellency must hear people's verdicts. It's not about politics. And I'm with all humility and with a lot of respect to my colleagues that unless I have contested several elections, this will be my fate. People don't forgive. Because when you do that, people don't easily forgive. They may keep quiet, but they are looking for an opportunity to strike. Because they believe that, look, even in this times of difficulty, this is what some people have done. What if we get power? They may be doing worse because that time they may even have been supported with political authority. So to tell those members that this your fear is genuine and I'm going to allay it, these persons will take a back seat and not be allowed to take a front seat.
You have this man sitting in the in the Council of State, serving under the MPP, and sitting in your Council of Elders meeting. Then you turn around and tell people that people are leaking information. Why can't we call a spade and say this person is no longer with our party? We are distancing ourselves from you. Until we call a spade in our party and say, look, yes, you are a senior, we thank you for your service, but if you can no longer toe the line of the party, no individual is bigger than the party. But a party that lacks the balls and the guts to discipline errant elders cannot rein in exuberant young people. And so you will begin to have pockets of people beginning to take the law into their own hands. You want to fix this party? Instill discipline.
Anybody who loses an election and feels that the process was not fair, it was not balanced, and that things were done in a manner to undermine his or her chances, has a difficulty lending themselves to any reconciliatory process. When you are put in there as a national officer, you must act in ways that advance the interests of the party. It is not unusual in politics to have a situation where, based on one or two considerations, the party believes that this candidate is preferable to that candidate. In instances like that, what you use is dialogue and a consultative process to impress upon a person who will be adversely affected as to why it is necessary to make that sacrifice. But if you do not do that, and you attempt to sidestep the process or skew the process in a manner that makes it unfair, then you are going to have some of these difficulties. I had a challenge with a national organizer, and it resulted in some controversy. I'm sure you read it. Yeah. I do not want to go into that. Yeah. But what business did a national organizer have interfering in a constituency election like that?
That's true. The key point in this determination is that the serial numbers on the ballots in question are from the booklet used in the constituency election. And since there is no overvoting, these ballots cannot be said to be foreign materials. This means, as far as our internal elections are concerned, stamping of ballot papers are irrelevant, given no overvoting and the correspondence of serial numbers to the booklet. If these ballots were removed during sorting, will we be here? Or the fact that they were taken out after recount and not even after EC declaration make them valid? Can our members accept this if it occurs to us in the national elections? This really worries me. This concern notwithstanding, I remain positive about the course of the party for victory 2024.
And that's Edem Agbana's constituency, where there was some controversy there, but there was a few bit of controversy as well. As you heard in that clip, there are many of the winning candidates themselves were not happy. So you can begin to imagine what will be going through the minds and hearts of those who lost. More than 15 of them who fell in this primary. And in the studio with me is a man who many will say was very lucky because he was unopposed in the Yape-Kosogo constituency. True that, you count yourself extremely lucky that you had nobody contesting you.
Yes. Thank you. This is my second time running without having a contest. The first one I had a contest, two very strong people. I think the margin showed that maybe they ought to give me that breather. Also, it's about your relationship with your constituents, and more importantly, the kingmakers who are the delegates. I'm sure that people would have gauged the constituency.
You don't want to go and waste your time.
If I go to pick the form, would I really make any inroads? And so let me thank my polling station executives, the constituency chairman. In some constituencies, normally the MP has a problem with either the chairman, the secretary, or two or three other people. Fortunately for me, we appear to be working in tandem. We have a very cordial working relationship. It's usually an NDC stronghold, even though at a particular year we won with only 104 or so votes. We've been able to move it to about 9,000 thereabout and held it around. In 2016, it was about 9,000. In 2020, it was about 8,900. So we've really done quite well. It is our hope that as we prepare for the party to assume power in 2025, the margin would even increase more. It's not going to be that easy, given that normally when you stay for 1 or 2 terms, expectations, and in a typical rural setting, everybody sees the MP as their source of whatever they need. And even when you try to explain that, look, sometimes you really need to stretch, some people would not understand. And so it's normal. When you are in power, it's a bit more easier. You may be lucky to have an appointment, and so your level of influence is much, much bigger. But let's see how it goes. And I was expecting that the two candidates who were contesting against His Excellency John Mahama would have done some self-introspection. I mean, any objective person, beyond the politics, would tell that, look, it was going to be very difficult to beat President Mahama in the primaries. He towers above them. Except that the results tells me that the party is really focused. They know what they want. It's clear if you look at the presidential results, almost 99%. I was part of the team. So the previous one, I was part of the team. We had about 95%. And so Professor Joshua Labi's target was that we should not go below the 95% target. And so we set ourselves to ensure that we achieve a minimum of 95. Later did we know that we could do up to close to about 99%. And so this is a time to close the ranks. President Mahama has indicated that Kojo Bonsu has called him. I think it's also indicated that Dr. Duflo has placed a call to him. So there's real unity. And for such a big party, one shouldn't be surprised that there are 1 or 2 complaints. For 275 constituencies with a level of competition, you would surely expect that 1 or 2 people will not be happy. I've heard Sam George, I've heard Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, I've heard, I think...
Muntaka Mubarak,
Yeah, these are concerns I think the party should take on board. Because whether you like it or not, they are your candidates. Whether you like it or not, some of them are your MPs. We must necessarily work together and ensure that we bring the party.
Let me ask you your take on the more than 15 of your colleagues who lost the primaries, including your good friend Bawa, who sits on the Committee of Mines Energy with you. He's lost his bongo. Have you called them to commiserate, and how is that going to affect the work going forward? You have still a lot to still do in Parliament. Would they still have the energy?
Absolutely. I've lost about 4 members on my committee as ranking member.
In this last primary?
Yeah. I've lost Dr. Donko, I've lost Bawa, I've lost Delasoa, I've lost Jogi Disu. No, that's quite a huge hemorrhage. 4 people, and my committee is one of the strongest committees when it comes to the NDC side. You have Dr. Donko there, you have myself, you have Bawa, you have Kofi Amabua, you have Naza Toure. You have some very, very tough, intelligent guys within the energy sector. And so it's a big blow. But sometimes it even pushes them to work harder. I recall when Ras Mubarak lost, people thought that he was going to relax, but he gave up his best. And so it's not always the case. It's about how we handle it. I'm sure that the flag bearer would meet, first of all, the losing candidates Eventually, I'm sure he'll meet all of us as MPs, and I'm sure he will also meet all the NDC candidates. And so I don't think that we've lost so much. It's unfortunate. I really thought that those members on my committee were doing a very, very good job. Very sharp, intelligent, articulate guys. It's unfortunate. Sometimes I've said that you are better off losing the primaries than losing the general election.
Yeah, wow.
Or it comes, at least once you lose the primaries, you can prepare and know that, look, you are leaving, so you prepare. But I hope that our numbers increase in Parliament, and
that's in the main elections.
Yeah,
stay with me, John. Let me bring in Richard Ahiagba. He's a director of communications for the New Patriotic Party, and he joins us right now via Zoom. We still have Dr. Tui Champon, who is an economist, but also relevant for this conversation. He's a political risk analyst. I want to tap into his expertise a bit, into what the outcome what the outcome means for the NDC going into next year's election. But Richard, let me come to you. Now, your main opposition, your main contender in the elections next year, the NDC, they've completed their reorganization now. They have a new flag bearer. They know who their candidates are, barring a few constituencies still yet to be done. I mean, they are ready, I guess, for you next year. You, however, have a long road with, several primaries down the line. That leaves you at least a year behind the NDC if you do the calculations. Is that some cause for concern for the MPP? Sorry, Richard, if you may unmute for me. Can you hear you?
Yes, sorry.
Great. I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you, Evans. Greetings to my brother JJ and Dr. Thea Champo, and to your listeners and viewers across the country. Okay, so it is not a concern for us necessarily because we are starting our own processes. I think the 26th of this month, the presidential primaries will commence. And hopefully, if there are no more than 5 candidates picking the forms, then we'll transition through to the elections and without the special delegate conference. So our processes will unfold as we have designed them, and it's just a matter of time. And so really, there isn't any pressure from the NDC, but to say that they have terminated their processes, and so now they move to the next stage of prepping and organizing for the election next year. So I think it's just a process they have finished, and we're starting ours. It doesn't really present any pressure, but if anything at all, it gives us some markings on the road to observe and see the things that we can avoid. Some of the concerns that were raised in the videos that you played earlier, we can watch and try to educate ourselves to avoid those flashpoints and make sure that our election, as always expected of the MPP, is as peaceful, as transparent as should be, and that we can carry through with it without any major internal effects in terms of people feeling slighted by any part of the electoral process. So there isn't any real pressure in terms of us feeling like, well, they have elected their officers or completed the process, as it were. But for us to be able to model ours to be an exemplary process that can help enrich our democracy. So we're quite happy for them. And the challenges that they're talking about, I think that for the NDC standards, they've done very well. And in fact, one thing that we need to commend them for is the fact that they were able to organize both the parliamentary and presidential elections all on one day, given their particular situation. Not that we couldn't do it, but given the specific circumstances we have, we are not doing it that way. But I think it's something of an organizational fit that we can commend them for. And then just hope that they are able to deal with the internal spillovers, which are some of them very serious. If you look at the situation with the Dr. Dufour That's a major happening, right? For the first time, an internal election taken to court in a manner at the presidential level has been taken to court. But for Dr. Dufour's own grace to withdraw from the race, and if he had persisted with a case in court, nobody knows how it would have ended. Would it be that the NDC wouldn't have had the primaries last Saturday, and that would have set them back and probably put a monkey wrench in their planning for 2024. So I think that they've been saved, and the outcome largely, now we can talk about it because there's no major rift in there. The situation you referred to in Ketu North, for example, is also something that when you think about it, it may just be some pressure point that was pressed for some individuals to align, and therefore people fell in line. I've had reports from the ground that suggest that the consensus reached is not exactly how we should have gone, to say that Adam won. People are still contending it and suggesting that perhaps the guy ceded his position for the good of the party. And so they have some real problems to resolve in-house, but we wish them well. What happens now, Evans, before you ask the question?
Sure.
The Ghana awaits the New Patriotic Party to select the next president of this republic, and that will be done in November of this year.
Okay, you go straight to electing not a candidate, but the next president.
No, we will select the next president.
Okay, you select the next president. Okay, I'll come back to you, John. But let me get to a Champon's quick. Right, Tio, how are you reading the outcome?
No, I was just laughing at Richard's last comment.
Exactly.
Quite interesting to hear that. But I think, on the NDC side, it was quite obvious who would win the presidential, primaries. And then also the different parliamentary candidates, for the party. There was an expectation that some of them would lose their seats, and these things are normally driven by internal grassroots dynamics, than what's happening at an external level. But I think that is behind them now, and from some of the statements that I'm seeing, it looks as though there's a clarion call for party unity in that regard to execute their campaign agenda going forward, because we've got a very interesting year ahead of us with all of the stuff that is happening with the economy, the IMF, and those discussions that we're having. I mean, basically, on the side of the incumbent government of the MPP, they've gone to probably the first quarter of next year to turn this economy around. And going into next year, the competition would be really about what I call them the two P's, right? It's going to be on policy and it's going to be on personality. And in that regard, John Mahama and whoever is elected on the NPP side and the other people around him, all of the conversation would really be driven around these two policy, personality type, debate. So one key thing or indicator personally I'm actually looking out for in terms of how this possibly would pan out is the by-election that we're going to have this Tuesday in Kumu.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very interesting by-election. If you look at the margins from 2016 and 2020, 2016, the late MP had a substantive margin. In 2020, that had dwindled a little bit, I think, to about just under 15,000. And there was an independent candidate that got about 12 or so thousand. I don't have the specific numbers, but it's largely within that ballpark. And off the back of all of that, which is happening with inflation and the economy and all those challenges, it remains to be seen the extent of the margin, if any, that the MPP, because they retain that seat, right, if any, may get, or there might even be a flip over if that were to happen. But that would be very telling of what the feelings of Ghanaians are at the grassroots with all of the stuff that is going on. And then when you superimpose on top this debate about, who is best positioned to fix the economic crisis or the mess that we find ourselves in, I think we're really in for a very, very interesting campaign going into 2024. The MPP did campaign in 2016 on the track record that they are quote-unquote competent economic managers, right? Things happened, a lot has changed, but even in the IMF document we were just discussing, the IMF said that there were pre-existing, fiscal and debt vulnerabilities, which was compounded by the pandemic. So you've got a lot happening on both parties and who they choose. But on the NDC side, they know who they've gotten, and it's then a question of to what extent, if any, do Ghanaians perceive John Mahama as a credible candidate to give them their the vote.
Yeah, I mean, and Theo, if you may, because that last point you made there, I want to put it to John, because it's a fundamental point. I mean, John Mahama, Junapo gets 98% plus, almost 99% in the delegates' elections. But as Stu says, that victory will mean absolutely nothing if the general public in the next year's elections reject him, right? So the question that he asked, I want to put to you: to what extent can he position himself as the most credible person next year to win the elections? Because for the very first time in our political history, you're having a candidate, not two candidates, I think John Mahama included, who have all been, we have a former president who is now standing for re-election after the expiration of another term. It's never happened before. So that unknown, nobody really knows how it's going to play out, right? So that question needs to be answered. I wonder if the NDC have done that analysis of, is John Mahama, yes, delegates give him, but considering that 1 year he did before, and this is the first time we are seeing another, this sort of dynamic, how credible is he?
Very, very credible. There's no doubt about that. The truth is that in 2016, it was a very tough year. Don't forget, the MPP had been in opposition for 8 years. President Mahama took over with a very difficult situation. Commodity prices had tumbled. The situation was tough. We had even gone for an IMF program, and the MPP used the IMF program big time against President Mahama. In fact, going to an IMF program was synonymous to incompetence. To cut a long story short, he lost by about 1 million. 2020, he stood against President Akufo-Addo. President Akufo-Addo used this same IMF program against President Mahama. Any time you criticize the MPP, the response was that, though you took us to IMF. Though you took us to IMF. It was very, very normal for them to say that. Irrespective of that, he clawed back about 600,000 votes. And so he really pushed, and then our parliamentary minority, which was very, very slim, I think about 9p something, we brought it to about 137. But for the problem we are having with the
Security?
Yes, because he won. I mean, as for the votes, he won. It's just legal issues with respect to his nationality that is denying him. Other than that, we put up a very good show for the 2020 elections. We even went to court and insisted that some of the issues were not properly dealt with, but the court is ruled. So now, fast forward, we're going to 2024. The dynamics are changing. People are now beginning to see the true MPP in terms of their economic record. Dr. Baumia, for instance, was presented as an economic wizard, and that irrespective of the challenge, he had a magic wand to deal with the situation. Now we are realizing that that is not the situation after all. For the first time in the history of this country, as I said, under the fourth Republican dispensation, we are defaulting on all these payments. Even under President Mahama's IMF, we never defaulted, and we never had this kind of challenges we are seeing. This level of inflation, we never had it. So it's a situation that we are all assessing. I'm sure the MPP is also assessing it. We are also assessing it. We have to find a way of presenting our candidate, like you said, as a credible candidate, telling Ghanaians the challenges, telling Ghanaians what he did in terms of infrastructure, in terms of health sector, the energy sector and all that. And some of us have to lead that charge. Some of us have to lead that debate and tell the people of Ghana why they need one, President Mahama, and why they need the NDC. And I think that it wouldn't be as difficult as one would have had the situation.
Because the MPP has helped your case.
In 2020. Not just that. Naturally, when you stay in power for a while, even as an MP, there's some level of attrition. Naturally. And also, the MPP came up with very, very promising slogans. I mean, employment, NAPCO was a key issue. Even in 2020, the campaign was that if you vote for President Mahama, he will cancel NAPCO. Now we've seen that NAPCO is not sustainable. So the dynamics are changing. And so I do not always want to rush to draw conclusions. But I'm convinced that President Mahama has a very, very, very good chance of winning and becoming president. I mean, the ground is very fertile for him. And more importantly, you also need the party's unity.
Yeah, I'll come to that. Stay with me, because that is a substantive point we need to look at the back of the primary. But Richard, the dynamics are changing, he says. That the last 8 years, he says, you've shown your true nature and you've held their cause because of where the economy is. And that makes John Mahama, who was significantly damaged after 2016, significantly reformed and able now to put up a challenge. On the face of the pink sheet, as we've been saying now, that's true, is it not? That where the economy is today and the pain that we're anticipating with this IMF program going down the line, this is going to be challenging to ensure that John Mahama doesn't, become the option for voters because of the credibility that he's gained over the last 8 years.
Well, thank you very much, Evans. I think John tries to explain the issue, but it's just a difficult one. It's a question where I think the NDC will struggle with greatly to establish the credibility of the former president. Not that his personal, in terms of his personal life, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about his political credibility in terms of being a leader and making promises and living up to it. If you take the NDC's proposition to Ghanaians from 2008, all the things they said they were going to do, part of which former President Mahama will be held accountable, I think, because he was the vice president and then eventually became the president. And then throughout that period, the first term, they couldn't achieve key components of that, key planks of their proposition, particularly with respect to employment. They didn't achieve anything. In fact, in the second term, the former president was frustrated when people asking.
Richard? Yes, okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, so did you just lose me?
Yeah, I just lost you for a second.
Okay. So I was saying is that the NDC, led by the former president, has a real task of trying to establish credibility, and we're going to try and engage in that conversation to get them to prove that credibility, because we think that he doesn't. And I'll show you some evidence to that. And I was just talking about employment, which is a cardinal issue in this election, where a vast majority of our young people need employment, and the issue of a party putting forward a proposition that can address that concern. The NDC have made that promise several times in the past, but haven't been able to live up to the expectation, and not only failed to live up to the expectation, but became agitated when people were asking the legitimate question of what he promised, and they haven't seen the delivery of it. You recall the former president describing himself as not being a magician to put money in people's pockets, and that if people wanted money, or if they want to make a good living for themselves, they have to go out there and get a job. But if you look at the 2008 manifesto that the NDC put forward, they talked about creating jobs. And in fact, there's a particular proposition, if I can find it, I think on page 56 of that manifesto, one thing that the former president said in saying that he's not a magician, he said that people should get out there and find jobs. But in that statement, he said that the jobs that he have created, people don't have the skills to take them, right? But in that manifesto, the page 56 that I referred you to, the end.
I mean, Richard, I mean, are you recollecting this? Are you recollecting this correctly? John, allow him to. This recollection of John Mahama making comments about employment. You recollecting this correctly? Because I don't recall.
You don't recall what?
That John Mahama making the point about
he's created jobs that people don't have the skills
expertise for it. I mean, John Jinapa, please allow the man to clarify. I mean, I'm asking if you're recollecting that correctly.
Yes, I can just read a story to you if you want.
Please do.
And that story is on Ghana Web. I'm not sure what John is laughing at, but if you go to Ghana Web, the story is on is a story published, I think, November 2016. It said, "I am not a magician," Mahama tells unemployed graduate. Evans, you can read the story if you want, but I can find a specific place. But if you see the headline, the specific place that is, can find that. So he added, well, anyway, John can read that, but I'm not sure why he was laughing.
But your substantive, let's go to your substantive point. Your substantive point about employment?
The point I am making, I'm trying to link it to a promise they made in the 2008 manifesto, where they proposed that they were going to expand skills training facilities for urban youth. This is page 74 of their 2008 manifesto. Now, having made that promise and had a first term not fulfilled that, and then in 2016, when young people asking for employment and criticizing his government, he says that he's a magician to put money in their pocket. And in that story, if John then goes ahead to read it, he will see where I was referring to, where he was saying that much of the jobs in the labor market, employees or young people lack the skills to be able to take advantage of those jobs. Now, if what John is laughing at is to say that I say he's created jobs and people don't have skills for, it's implied. If you say that there are jobs and people lack the skills for that job, it means that you have created jobs and people don't have the skills to take the job. So that's the connection he needs to make. So the point I am making is that there is no credibility when it comes to solving the key problem. And this employment issue is critical because in the former president's acceptance speech, he talked about creating jobs. And we're saying that there's a record of making those promises of jobs and haven't been able to fulfill those promises. And so therefore, it's going to be difficult for him to establish credibility on that subject to the youth of this country, saying that I would come and create employment for you, when we know, based on his own commentary, about his ability to create jobs, and therefore people should be able to go find jobs for themselves. If they want to make an income, they must go out there, that he has no magic to put money in their pocket.
Yeah, I mean, and stay with me, and I will have to take a quick break. I'll come back, John.
I want to deal with this employment.
I know you want to, but stay with me. I want to come back to that. And then Dr. Choi Champon, when I return from the break, that last point there about, track record, it's going to possibly be more important in this election next year than any other time in our Fourth Republic, because for the first time, you will have two candidates on the ballot, regardless of who the MPP elect. If it's Alan or if it's Bawumia, both of them have been in government, they've been in cabinet, so they are going to come into the equation on their own record, right? And then you have a former president for the first time in our history also seeking re-election and competing with them. How important will that be? Because that dynamic we haven't seen before. We haven't seen. So how will this dynamic impact on the outcome? And then you raise the issue about John Mahama, trying to deal with that credibility subject, also because of his 4-year record. How does he do that? When I come there, I'll take your views, and then I'll get John's reaction to the employment question. Stay with us. And thank you very much for still staying with us as we wrap up with the politics. And just before we went for the break, a very interesting proposition that was put forward about the records of both parties, which will be even more relevant this year than any other time in our history, really, because of the nature of the contest you're going to have. And one of the things that Richard Ihagba had brought up is the records on job creation, etc. And John, you wanted to respond to that?
No, but he hasn't given us any figure, except to say that there's a headline by Ghana Web that he heavily relies on a headline and say that John Mahama said A or B. I think what you would normally do, Richard, is to say that the unemployment rate, maybe in 2016, was X. Following our interventions, the unemployment rate in, say, 2022 is dropped by X amount. And I give you this document from World Bank that shows that unemployment is rather on the ascendancy. So, Richard, if you want us to go with this kind of debate, I'm sure that the people listening and watching would not enjoy it, because what this person said, what this person did not say, the media reported this. Let's deal with the concrete, cogent figures, statistical figures, the data, so that we can interrogate them and see whether we are making progress or not. As we speak, we don't even know your candidate. We don't know whether it will be Dr. Baumia, Kennedy Japan, Covenant Japan, Alan, etc. So it will be very difficult to even begin to pitch Mahama against a plethora, a lot of people who are still in the field. At least we know the track record of Dr. Baumia. We can tell. Being the head of the economic management team, we can tell his track record today. At least we can assess him. Alan has been a minister, we can assess him. So let's see how it goes. Other than that, I think that President Mahama has done a lot of things that you can pinpoint. Maybe you didn't do slogan of 1D, 1F, but Atuabo gas processing plant alone saves us $350 million in terms of import substitution.
But you're as good as a politician, you know this, you're as good as your performance in your last term.
Yes.
Right? His last term ended in 2016, and that last term didn't end well.
And
that's what people will remember.
Term. But I'm saying that last term is better than the current term. His inflation is better than today. His deficit is better than today. His track record when it comes to payment of coupons and debt servicing is better than today. Debt to GDP is better than today. Exchange rate is better than today. Every macro indicator that you take, if the last term is the standard, is better than today. The CD is depreciated by about 53%. When President Mahama was living, inflation had come down to about 15%. Today we are talking of food inflation of about 60%. President Mahama, throughout his tenure, never defaulted on bond payments. Our pensioners today do not even know their future. So I would prefer that kind of leadership than what we are witnessing today. If last terms are the standards of measure, look at where we are today. 0.5 months of import cover. Is that what you want? This country is bankrupt. That is a fact. We've even suspended repayment or debt servicing.
Yeah, the 600 million is in. So,
please, when we went for the IMF program, we never suspended repayment of coupons on our debt obligations. See where we are today. This country is in a hopeless state. To the extent that, look, without this IMF bill, I would have just crashed out. So clearly, if you want us to use last terms, we will be very, very happy. If you want us to use whatever figure, let's deal with absolute, measurable, quantifiable data.
So you're going to be, in your next year, you're going to be comparing Mahama's last term versus...
No, you brought it. I didn't. Okay. You said his last term.
In elections are one of records, right?
Yeah,
so you're saying that's
fine.
Okay.
But the people also assess the current situation. That's a fact.
Let me bring into a point. Dr. Choi, that dynamic is going to be interesting. How would that, influence the outcome next year? And if you look at the John Mahama factor, he's obviously the overwhelming winner in the NDC primary, but he has a very obvious track record that he's going to go into next year with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point is that there is a resurgent NDC, right? The NDC of 2016 is not necessarily the NDC of 2023. Even when you look at some of the policy posturing and the announcement, if you look at some of the statements President Mahama has been making at different international and local fora, I am getting a bit more depth and I'm getting a bit more detail around that. But the other point is, and where I disagree with Richard, is that both of the parties, at least on the economic front, have a serious issue with credibility on the macro front, right? In the last term, 2016, we know what happened, Doomso and all the other related issues. Now we're talking about the, debt restructuring, domestic exchange, and the ripple effect of that, and an IMF program as well. And this time around, it's also affecting, importantly, the middle class. So it's not just people down, but your typical middle class folks that traditionally may gravitate even towards, let's say, an MPP than an NDC. Many of them have been hit hard by this current, crisis. So I don't think that the debate or the substantive issues is about employment as Richard sought to portray. There are deeper issues around the economy, the cost of living, the crisis that we all find ourselves in, and the way many of the citizens would assess really is what is going to change fundamentally this time around in terms of your offering, in terms of your policies, and in terms of the substance, right, behind it. It's no longer enough just to make, promises, but people are going to be pinning you to the wall in terms of the substance underpinning those promises and whether there's actually even the fiscal space to contain it. So remember, we're still going to be in an IMF program until 2026. So anybody drafting a manifesto, anybody working on party, document, we need to factor all these things in the,
You raised such an important point. In other words, the IMF has already given a template for the two parties' manifestos going into the
limit to what they both can do, but they all have a serious issue of credibility that they need to address. It's not just an NDC issue, the MPP equally, and even in most recent memory, a lot of people, those that are like youth looking for jobs, yes, we get that, but the middle class, importantly, have seen significant losses on their investments, on their livelihood, particularly in the last 2 years, and that's something that, for me, cannot be discounted.
And Mr. Ahiagba, your response to that?
So, Evans, I was saying that John didn't answer the question. The question you asked was specific about credibility, and I was trying to demonstrate to you that the former president promising that he would create jobs in his acceptance speech, he mentioned some 13 items that he was going to work around, and that his credibility on that subject specifically cannot be trusted because of the things he said and done in the past. But John didn't answer that. Going back and talk about comparing the economy, that's a macro comparison that we can do. We're looking specifically at the candidacy of the former president and whether or not, your question, whether or not he can be trusted. So it's a specific analysis that we're doing. And so he didn't obviously answer the question. But what I'm trying to say is that the former president has to go through this hurdle of being trusted on the matter. The issues that are at play now, for which he's going to be campaigning, when he talk about the economy, yes, we can look at the economy. What was his position? What was his offering? And what was the outcome? And how does he explain that? Now, if you just look at what is happening today, which Dr. Tia Champon is canvassing, and I think John particularly is relying on, the current situation, I was trying to draw your attention earlier to say that if John is talking about the current situation we're in, then you need to text it for him properly. The context in which we are talking now is vastly different from what existed when the NDC recorded a 15.4% inflation that it's talking about, right? So if you have that conversation, we are not going to be absent in the conversation, right? We're going to be present. And we're going to remind Ghanaians that, look, what era he's talking about, these were the realities. And this era that he's comparing that era to, these are the circumstances, so that people will appreciate the two dynamics or the two environments vis-a-vis what obtained. There wasn't any COVID then. They tried to minimize it. There wasn't any Russia-Ukraine. And those are significant global happenings. And if you see how the IMF put it, talks about major external shock. So those major consequential external shock has the capacity of trumping any conditions that you had. In fact, if there were no...
Just a quick one, Richard. In 2014-15, you also had a slowdown in China, no? Didn't we have global commodity prices also dropping? I mean, I'm just throwing it into the conversation.
Yeah, but Dr. Theo, that has always been the situation because
so the big argument is that the external shocks would always be there. And in fact, it's going to even get much more worse in the years.
Exactly. So that's my point.
Right.
The point you are making about commodity prices falling, that threat is always going to be there, and actually is still there.
Okay. I'll come to you. I just have less than 2 minutes. Just a second. Yes. Richard, go ahead. Just a minute to wrap up, so that I can give my minute here to wrap up. So.
Okay, thank you. So the point I'm making to Dr. Theo's point is that yes, those external shocks will be there, but global shock in the nature that is reported in this report, it's never been there. COVID has never been there. The direct effect of Russia-Ukraine has never been there. Even if you want to argue about Russia-Ukraine, you can argue about it. But I'm telling you that the catastrophic effect of COVID has never been there. So on top of the pre-existing global shocks that will come up and down, part of the economic cycle existed. Everybody had to work within that.
Yeah.
But here and now, you are talking about a serious extenuating circumstance being COVID-19 that you can control for and see that the MPP's performance compared to the NDC is nowhere comparable.
Okay. Richard, thank you very much. You have a minute. Sorry, Richard, thank you. 1 minute. You have a minute. Yes.
This is why government is investing as much as it is investing to try and provide our people with the skills that they need to enter the world of work.
So this is the Ghana website.
He added, if you sit at home and you don't take advantage of the opportunities, money is not going to magically appear in your pocket. So what government is doing is investing to create the situation so that as many of our people can take the opportunity as possible, and we are doing this in all sectors. This is verbatim. And Richard comes to sit here and say that he says that he's not a magician. Such blatant falsehood against the person of President Mahama. And that is what the NDC ought to watch going into this election, where people take President Mahama's otherwise well-intended statement, twist it, and blatantly misrepresent it. In any case, finally, employment. Your trump card is NAPCO. Richard, is that not your trump card? He said NAPCO is unprecedented. It would employ 100,000 people every year. It has collapsed. And let me just quote the IMF document. Large external shocks have exacerbated, and this is the operative word, pre-existing fiscal and debt vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Please read these documents.
Thank you very much, Jinapo. Thank you, Richard Ayagba. Thank you, Dr. Tuya Champon, and to all of you who watched us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.